Hey guys, it's Tree Top here. Video I've got for you today is a load development video for the 7.62 by 25 Tokarev cartridge. And the reason I'm doing this is I've recently converted all my auto-loading pistols over to CFE Pistol, and I like it quite a bit. It's a Hodgdon CFE Pistol, and I like it quite a bit, and I thought it would be a good fit for this little Tokarev cartridge. Unfortunately, there is no data for this, and there probably never will be any official data for it. There's just no interest in supporting this cartridge for most of these manufacturers. So that brings me to this video. I thought I'd share the process with you. So what I hope to achieve in this is I would like to be able to develop a load that I feel is safe, uses this powder, and takes advantage of the speed properties, velocity that this little cartridge is capable of, and actually make it a useful cartridge. So that's what I'm hoping to get, and to share it with you, the process, and kind of move the ball forward for us reloaders. Guys, before I get started, I want to just cover a little safety issue. Obviously, this is a reloading video, and safety is always a concern. I make no claims about the safety of what you see here. I cannot determine in any way if anything you see here is safe for you to do, and I'm not trying to encourage you to do it. I'm just doing it as an educational / sharing concept. Now, that said, when I was trying to decide if I was actually going to make a video about this or not, I realized that a lot of the load data that I personally used over time had been bootleg data that other people had shared online and worked up. So it's in that spirit that I make this video. Like I said, I'm not encouraging you to do this, but if there's somebody out there who is thinking about this, this is a path that's maybe got a few footsteps on it already. Okay, so a little bit about this powder. This is a fairly new powder. It's certainly fairly newly available, given the powder shortages we've been through. It has a treatment on the powder that reduces copper fouling. That's why it comes up with a CFE, a copper fouling eraser. In my investigation in this, I found that it's a new formula. It's not a retreatment of an older formula, as best I was able to determine. This formula was developed for the military to reduce copper fouling in pistols that have a high rate of fire, like a machine pistol. So that's not really what attracted me to it. The reason I was attracted to it is because I like the idea that it's a newer formula. A lot of the formulas out there are almost 100 years old. This is brand new. What I saw in load data was that it was able to develop a little bit better velocity than some of its competitors under the same pressure profile. So I thought that was pretty neat. And I thought it seemed to be a little bit of a slower burning powder, which favors a longer barrel. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. It also favors the slight bottleneck cartridge being a little bit slower. So here is what it looks like, if you can see that. Sort of a flattened ball is how I would describe it. So it looks pretty similar to a lot of other powders that are out there. Let's get back to the powder and burn rate just a little bit here. So here's the deal. Burn rate in powder is, as I've discovered, is sort of a subjective thing. There's no real yardstick for it, industry standard for it, or anything like that. It's sort of observational, and so for fun we're going to do a test on that. But I just want to cover that a little bit. And if you haven't been exposed to why burn rates matter, or expansion rates matter, or however you want to call it, I made this little chart here. If you can see that, basically, just going to do a little graph here, time in milliseconds this way and PSI this way. This is sort of crude, but maybe I can do it in a way that'll help you kind of visualize it a little bit. So if you have a max pressure threshold up here that you don't want to reach, what I've done here is drawn a red line to illustrate what a faster burning powder might look like. Faster burning powders are usually pretty volatile. They burn really fast, and they kind of get their burn cycle done quickly. Now that has a place, because if you have a short barrel pistol, you really want that burn completed as rapidly as possible so that you can actually utilize all the propellant. Now, the downside to a fast burning propellant is they usually have a pretty steep peak pressure that you have to worry about. And in terms of safety, it's the peak that gets you. And that can spike pretty quickly with just small changes in load or in the way the ammunition is loaded. So I drew the green line to kind of illustrate what a little bit of a slower burning powder might look like. And so it comes up to a peak pressure a little bit slower, and it has a little bit more time to burn. Now this favors a longer barrel in this scenario. And it usually allows you to use more propellant, more powder, which gives you more potential for velocity. So, and because it burns a little slower, some things are able to happen. Let me just put got another layer here. There's my little ugly stick barrels, but I just wanted to put these up here to kind of help you visualize. So you have a fast burning powder, which has its place in a short barrel. In just my crude little illustration here, you can kind of see that burn has to get done in a short space, otherwise you just blow powder out the end. Now, if you have a longer barrel, you can actually use a slower powder. You can probably use more of it and take advantage of that little extra space you have. We're talking fractions of really tiny fractions of a second, but it matters. The other thing is, because the pressure comes up a little bit slower, as the bullet moves, it actually creates space for more expansion without increasing your peak pressure. So there's a real solid timing event that's going on there that's kind of important to understand. And I just want to put that out there in case you haven't seen this before or hadn't really thought about it before. I've prepared a little bit of a burn test just for fun. We're going to take a look at it, but it kind of goes along with what we're talking about. I thought we'd take a look at burn rate, actually do just a little completely unscientific, useless burn rate test, but to actually see if we could see the difference in how these powders work. And I've got them lined up how I think they're going to burn. I think the Unique is going to be the fastest. I think CFE Pistol is going to be a little bit slower. I'm guessing, based on the velocity they're getting out of this, it's going to be, the Southern Bellot is going to be a little bit slower. I've actually pulled a bullet, and here's the powder. And then H110 is the slowest powder they use in the reloading data, and it produces the highest velocities. The reason I'm not really looking at this as a serious load is because it takes quite a bit of powder. It throws a huge fireball. It's a little bit more of a parlor trick than it is an actual viable everyday shooting powder. Like I said, completely unscientific and probably almost useless, but interesting. I have a fire extinguisher just in case you want to. Hopefully my lighter works. We're going to go with the Unique. And we're going to go with the CFE Pistol. Seems like a little bit slower than the Unique. This is the pulled Southern Bellot. That was pretty close, actually. A little bit slower, I think. And here's the H110. Definitely a slower burning powder. So you can actually see the difference in the two there. Incidentally, that was 0.4 grains of each one measured out carefully on a scale. Okay, so let's talk about the components I'm using real quick. I am using unfired Starline brass, 7.62 by 25 brass. I am using Remington 1.5 small pistol primers. I'll be using the XTP 30 caliber bullet. This is sort of a metric. It comes in at 309 in dimension instead of 308. It's item number 31000, as you can see there. These are great little bullets. They're fairly inexpensive, but they're also in the XTP line, so they're hollow points. They have an expanding nature to them. So I use these even for plinking. One size fits all. Obviously, I'm going to be using the CFE pistol. We're going to be firing this in the TT33 variant, the M57. I'll just be using that one for these load development. Okay, guys, before we go shoot, I want to actually cover methodology. So here's what we're going to do. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to load these up. I already have. I've got them marked with the powder charge that's inside. I'm going to be doing a ladder workup, 10 rounds at a time in 0.2 grain increments. So really a fine adjustment. We're going to shoot them. We're going to look at them. I'm going to be looking for how predictable each change of powder is, because that tells me when it's getting more volatile. I'm going to be looking at the condition of each case. And like I said, marking them with a Sharpie really helps you be able to put them back in their respective row and really analyze as the pressure builds in the case. What I did was I looked at a known powder that I've used with this before and how it compared to loads with CFE pistol and lots of other pistols. And I found that there was a real solid correlation between load data in other pistols in unique powder and the CFE pistol. They were almost the same across the board, 9mm, 45. They used almost the same charge weight. So I used that as a sort of a guide to how to get that powder into this one. And I determined that I thought a good starting point would be somewhere around 6 grains of powder. Now, to be on the safe side, I rolled that back to 5 grains of powder. And I work and like I said, I'm working up 2 grains at a time. The overall cartridge length, I'm using 1.300 or 1 inch 300 thousandths. The load data, incidentally, is probably important to bring up. The load data for Hornady for this bullet actually lists an overall length of 1.320, so 20 thousandths longer than I'm using. When I tested that load length in 2 different pistols, I actually encountered the lands before I head spaced off of the case, which is what is supposed to happen. So I had to back it up a little bit. Now, one other thing I'm going to be doing is it's a good idea to know what your pistol shoots other stuff out there when you're doing stuff like this. Get some factory stuff with the same weight bullet, shoot it, see how it actually performs in your gun, not the way it performs on paper, and then and then apply that to your reloading, and that's probably a good spot for your top end target, just to be safe. You don't want to take white paper velocities and try to apply your load data to it or match that load data. That's not a good practice, because your firearm may perform, in fact, most likely will. Most of the time when I shoot stuff that's rated, if this is rated at 1,700 feet per second, I might not see above 1,600 feet per second. So just be aware of that. I think that's a pretty good practice to always look at commercially loaded velocities versus what you're doing. And then you do have to remember, like we talked about burn rate. If the burn rate is faster, you're going to have to cut that back a little bit. You're going to have a velocity loss for that. All right, so we're back from the range, and I've got some spec cases to take a look at, and I've got some data that I've compiled, so you can look at that. And I have some observations. I also have 10 fingers, so that's that's a good load workup anytime that happens. So let's talk about the powder real quick. After firing this, I do feel like this is a powder that's in the range of powders that works well with this in terms of burn rate and performance. I went back and looked at the burn test that we did, and I was able to count the frames, and it turns out that this one was 2 frames slower than the powder that was in the Celeron Bellot. So I think it's right in the category that is good for this. So the next thing I noticed was I said that I thought 6 grains was a good place to start. I rolled back to 5 grains, and that was kind of a waste, because it turns out 6 grains is a good starting place, in my opinion, for this. At 5 grains, I couldn't even get, and it didn't even function the firearm very well. So that's an observation there. And while we're talking about function and ejection, one of the things you notice with a Tokarev is these things pretty much, I don't think anybody ever intended saving their brass, because these things put brass into pretty much a low Earth orbit. So that was something that I paid attention to, where the brass was landing, because this whole series through here, the brass was, landing right next to me, and that's just not normal for a Tokarev. So it wasn't until I got up around 6.6 grains that I started to see a normal ejection pattern. So that gives you an indication of slide velocity and what's going on there. So that gives you an indication how much pressure you're dealing with and all that. So the next indicator that I think is interesting is on pistol cases. You'll notice that you get these. Let me find a good one here. Try to get a picture of it. Yeah, that's not a very good one. That's a pretty good one. You get a firing pin swipe. Hopefully that'll come in there. Come on. So you see how that's not a perfect crater. You see that little swipe off to the side? And what that is when the bullet exits and the slide unlocks and it starts to come back, you can see that the first thing that the firing pin hits under the hammer there, so it hits the hammer, and then it rests pretty much on that to cock the hammer, or yeah, to reset the hammer for the next firing. So what's going on there is that the cocking action of the weapon has the firing pin lingering in the primer, and it, depending on the rate or velocity of the slide, the firing pin will linger long enough in there that it actually captures the ejection in a mark. So what you notice is, let's look at these 5-grain ones that didn't have any of that. Nice little round. So that is not normal for Tokarev. So that tells me that the slide velocity was really slow. There's a couple of them there. So if you remember, we fired the Celeron Bellot also as sort of a control. We try to get some velocity and some energy out of it and see how it performs. Now let's take a look at these. This is factory loaded. You can see those primers are even just a smidge flattened, I would say. But those ejector or firing pin swipes are pretty pronounced, and it has a pretty good crater in there. So what we're seeing there is a leftover imprint that gives you an idea of the velocity of the slide and how hard that primer or that firing pin was lingering in those primers as it went through the ejection cycle. So that's another indication I looked at as you go along. Here's the top of the load here. If you go along, if you can see those primers, you can see that the swipes get a little more pronounced as I went up. Now, I was able to get up to 7.8 grains here, and then this is where I stopped because I got a change in velocity. The velocity grew considerably from 7.6, and also the firearm started feeling a little bit squirrely on me. So I backed that up a little bit. That's where I'm going to go ahead and pull these, but I just wanted to show them to you guys. What else? Let me let you look at these here. You can pause this, try to get you a good view, and you can examine those. Hopefully you're getting a good view. Yeah, I think that's coming through. So I've got them marked off to the side with the amount of powder that was in them. So anyway, if you look at these are the factory loaded. You can see those firing pin swipes are pretty pronounced. And even on the ones that I thought were a little hot, they're not nearly as exaggerated as these are. So anyway, that's just another indicator of slide velocity, which also gives you another indicator of how much energy is being released there. So let's see, what else do we have? Let's take a look at the data itself. Okay, you might have to go full screen on this to take a look at this, but let me orient you. This area over here is the grains of powder that was loaded. These are the shots that I was able to pick up and record. Here's my average FPS, feet per second. Here's my standard deviation, and I went and calculated all the energy levels out here so we could take a look at that as well. So let's see. Oh, this one down here, the blue one down here, is the control. So remember we talked about the control and actually firing it, not taking what it says it's printed. this one, the Selling Bell was printed as saying 1647 feet per second. And when I fired it, my average was actually 1509. So if I was using this as a reference velocity or energy, you can see that I would probably be out of my league if I was loading up that way. So always good to really test fire something if you want to get close and see what's normal for your situation. So looking at the energy or the average feet per second here, you can see I was subsonic in the lower ones. This is 5.4 grains there. That's right at breaking the speed of sound. So that's too slow for a Tokarev. Coming on down, you see 1,500 feet per second was what we got out of this one. And then I didn't get to 1,500 feet per second until I was at 7.6 grains. Now, a little bit of a correction there. This is a 85 grain bullet. I was using a 90 grain bullet. So you can't use a direct velocity to calculate, to guesstimate pressure. It's more appropriate to actually use energy, because the energy will actually show up a little bit more on track. So the energy for the factory loaded ammunition was 430, and so that puts me at about 7.4 grains. Now, if you look at the data here, there was kind of a sweet spot right here where the standard deviation, I had a 6 on those. What I captured 8 of those, and they were 1,450 feet per second, or 1,437 average. And the energy is pretty similar to what you see here. So as a good, I think that's probably a realistic load, 7.2 grains for a total energy of 413, where the factory load gave me a 430. So I'm right in that range right there. And given that I had a pretty significant tightening of the standard deviation, like I said, that seemed to be a sweet spot. So that's the one I'm going to be looking at. Just for fun, I put the 9mm energy right here. So that kind of gives you an idea where this little cartridge stands. And since we're talking about 9mm, the only pressure that I could find for this cartridge, actually listed at Tokarev, is the CIP International. It's a European standard. It's like the American SAMI spec. And they list this cartridge at 36,220 PSI. To put that into perspective, that's 2,200 and some odd PSI higher than they list the NATO 9mm. So it is a little bit higher pressure cartridge. So I think that's just another data point to keep in the back of your head when you're thinking about what the potential performance is for this little guy. Often see it. Oh, one thing I wanted to say is the average feet per second went up gradually, very predictably, about 30 to 40 feet per second with each 2.2 grain change of powder. So that's what I like. And when I got to this point right here, the 7.8, you can see during firing, I jumped from 1503 to 1574, and that's where I felt like something had changed, like the thermodynamic properties were changing, and I was getting more velocity, so more recoil. And so I wasn't looking to push this in the first place. I just wanted to get something usable. I think I did that with 413 foot-pounds of energy out of a little surplus pistol. Guys, this video got a little long. I had some extra information on modern reloading with the Tokarev US reloading, and I cut that out because the video is just getting too long, as I'm sure you're aware if you got to this far. So I'm going to cut that out in a separate link. I won't even publish it, but I will put a link to it here so you can see it. It has to do with the history of reloading and how the pressures have been turned down for the American market in reloading manuals where it still exists. Most of it's all gone. So anyway, take care, guys. Thanks for watching. You know the drill. And give me some feedback. Thanks.